After a successful decade run as a featured documentary, Eyes of the Mothman is now a podcast containing bonus information and, for the first time ever, the complete, unedited field interview tapes with eyewitnesses, experts, and those who were directly impacted by the Mothman incidents that occurred in Point Pleasant, West Virginia in 1966 and 1967. Although this podcast is meant to act as a historical record and an archive of the events that transpired, all material contained here is not for reproduction without the written consent by the copyright holder, Redline Studios, Incorporated. Welcome to episode 11 of the Eyes of the Mothman podcast. This episode is all about someone I think is probably, like, if we had to go through our, not to say favorite interviews, but, you go through certain people, you're like, oh, I really like that guy.
I love Denny Bellamy.
Right. Our episode 11 is about the Field Raw interview tapes with Denny Bellamy. When we interviewed Denny, he was the director of the Mason County Tourism Center. And to be honest with you, he probably still is, or maybe he's moved on to other things. I haven't spoken to him recently, so I'm not sure. But Denny is someone who will always be Denny. I will always know what he looks like, what he sounds like. He left such an impression on us. He helped us with so many things: locations, interviews, people, bucket trucks, getting aerial shots. Anything we needed, Denny got us. He was just an absolute amazing person. We should have probably given Denny a producer credit.
We used to call him, I remember when we first met him, Neil was like, he's like our Santa Claus. He gets us anything that we need. Yes. He's so happy. Like,
he is. He had a salt and pepper beard.
Yeah.
He was a bigger guy. He was a former football player, I believe possibly at Marshall University. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
it was Marshall University. Oh, that's cool. He was like Santa Claus. Whatever. He was happy all the time, had a charismatic laugh, and would just give you gifts all the time.
Yeah, well, that's why he was in the position that he was in. He was essentially the salesman for the county. He was, part of the tourism idea, and so he was a welcoming person. That was his gig, and it was almost like he was meant to do that. He's from there. He has the accent from there. He played for Marshall, for God's sakes. He was there's a word that I learned a few years ago. It was called avuncular. Did you ever hear that word before?
No.
It is somebody who you would describe as someone you would want as your uncle.
Oh.
And that's really,
right.
describes
I'd let Denny adopt me.
Right. Exactly. I hope I'm pronouncing that word correctly. But he just had that sense about him. And when you were like, oh, we got to shoot this, and we wish we had a higher angle, or we wish we could get access to such and such, he would just be like, well, I'll make a phone call. That's all. And it was just like no problem for him.
He was on it.
And he was the point person. He was the point person for anything you wanted to do in that county. And I'm literally, I have a set of keys in my pocket that I have for this studio. You can believe it. Here it is. And it says the Mason County Tourism Center with their phone number.
That's amazing. Would you still have that?
Denny gave to me. I have this for 18 years.
That's awesome. He's just such a great guy. And Denny's son, Bo, was in the movie as one of the hunters.
Was Denny not in it with him?
No, that was Jan, who I believe was
that's right. His brother-in-law, yeah.
Denny's son was just he might have not even been a teenager at the time. I'm sure he's graduated college now, and it's just amazing to think about those things. But Denny literally gave us his firstborn son for the movie, temporarily to use as an actor.
I don't know how Denny sent the word out, but it seemed like because of him, everybody knew we were there, and they were so giving and open and welcoming to us.
It's like he informed the entire town, these people are coming, and you better be nice to them.
Right.
Like, we didn't have to do any of the legwork. He literally did everything that we should have done, like informed everyone we were going to be there, worked it out with the police department, made sure we had permission. He figured all of that out for us. It was so easy because of him.
Yeah. Great. We went to dinner at his house. Yeah. He just could not have been more hospitable, and just such an emblematic person of that area of, like, Southern hospitality at its most literal definition. We interviewed him down in that kind of like amphitheater that's outside that leads right to the Ohio River and you've got that bridge behind him, which is that railroad bridge, and behind him is where the Silver Bridge would have stood if it still was there today.
Very genuine and probably, I mean, again, it's his job, just the perfect representative of that part of the country.
Yeah.
You know, that's somebody who you would want to put at the forefront if you're trying to represent where you're from.
And he needs to be the mayor.
Seriously, he probably could in no time.
Sometimes when you interview these people, you go, okay, that's my Mothman guy, that's my UFO guy, that's my cornstalk guy, that's my Indrid Cold guy. Denny was someone who has just such a wealth of knowledge that like you're like, no, we're gonna interview him at length, and we're gonna ask him about everything. We're gonna ask him about cornstalk, we're gonna ask him about the bridge, we're gonna ask him about Point Pleasant, Mothman, everything, because he's like a living Siri for the area where you're like, hey, Denny, tell me about this. And he knows it.
Right.
He knows everything about everything in that area.
He could fill in any gap that you might have had with missing sound bites.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He would be essentially your universal expert.
When I think of his interview, maybe specifically about some of the sound bites he said, I don't know if we ended up putting this in the movie, but he was talking about experiencing the Silver Bridge collapse and how he recalled it. And the thing that he recalled is such a iconic image when you think of it. He just said, you know, there was a little girl. He was, I think, in elementary school at the time, I'm pretty sure. And he said, you know, there was a little girl in my elementary school and she died on the Silver Bridge. And, you know, this was during school time, you know, school still in session. And he just said, I remembered that empty desk sitting there the rest of my school year. There was always an empty desk there for where that girl, you know, 2 days ago, she was sitting in that desk and she never came back to it. And I had to sit there every day and still go through my lessons and look at that empty desk where she was. And it's just such a kind of a haunting image of that. And those little details, like I've experienced some tragedies in my life, and there are little tiny things that like stick out that you like couldn't write or script, where you're like, ooh, and it just kind of cuts through you.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like the image that they talk about, because it was right before Christmas when the bridge fell, and they were going over to Ohio to do better shopping. There was more stores and such, and
no sales tax, I believe.
Yeah, and when the bridge collapsed, they're like these floating presents on the water.
I'm sure anyone who saw that the time of the Silver Bridge falling, who saw those presents floating, never looked at a wrapped gift the same again, ever.
Right.
Yeah, no, there's just something about the imagery, the haunting imagery of the wrapped Christmas presents floating on the river. I just feel like it's something that, you know, years later people still remember.
It was a great interview, and just such a serene image too that I have in my mind of that beautiful river behind him with that bridge in the background. It's funny though, right? When you don't have to live it out there. Like I'm sure people look at that railroad bridge, which is right at the shadow of what the Silver Bridge was. They look at that bridge a hell of a lot differently than we do from someone who's not from out there. You know?
Yeah.
Denny was a great interview, had a great voice, great personality, just full of charisma. And I know I'm going to enjoy revisiting his old interview, and I hope you enjoyed as well.
What? Okay. So I'm just going to I'll run over some of the just the basics that make the interview always sound nicer and look nicer and all that stuff.
Okay.
I think, Masler, can you tape down that board so it doesn't move around?
Do you want me to look at you? Or?
Yeah, look at me. Talk to me. And it's like, just as if you and I are having a conversation, as if the camera's not there. I might ask you the same question twice or more than once. It's just to kind of get different options to use later.
Okay.
If I ask you anything that you don't know or it doesn't make sense or I've got something wrong, just tell me. And we'll just skip it or fix the question, you know, in case you don't have the facts right or something like that.
Okay.
The best thing to remember is later on when I go to use this, my question is not going to be there. So if you can like restate my question and your answer, it always sounds nice. Like if I say to you, how's the weather today? If you say good, later on all I have is good. But if you say, the weather's really nice today, then it's like then people know what you're talking about.
Okay.
Before that though, just so I have it, can you just say your name and spell it for me so I have it correctly?
1 minute. Dennis Bellamy, DennisBellamy.
Just tell me what your title is at the tourism team.
I'm the director of the Mason County Convention and Visitors Bureau.
Great. Okay. So my first question, I'm going to talk to you about the TNT area a little bit first. Just tell me about. Okay. Boy, yeah.
Take out and show some igloos.
Yeah. All right. So the first question is about the TNT. Can you just tell me what Mason County's role in World War II was? Tell me about the TNT plants that were built in the igloos and what their purpose was.
Well, during World War II, the government came here and built a facility to manufacture explosives, and it was built, it was operational, and dismantled on about 5 years. It was a secret facility. The people that worked there were brought. They brought them in. I guess they were searched before they went to work there, and put on uniforms. And I was told put on a bus and driven to exactly the building they were going to work in. They did their day's job, and then the bus met them at the door, took them back to the place where they originally started, and then they searched them again and sent them home. So, but it was its own little community. It was a huge operation, and a lot of local people worked there. There's a few left, but it was basically a facility to manufacture explosives.
Can you tell me a little about the igloos and what their purpose was?
Well, the igloos were basically a modern powder magazine, and they were built to store these explosives, and basically just like the powder magazines that they had when back in the Revolutionary War that they built, except these were modern, and they're basically igloo shaped. They're lined with concrete, and some of them I've heard are lined with lead too, but they're basically hidden from the air. They're difficult to see. Now you can stand within about 5 feet of one and not even know you're standing beside it. So they were meant to store all the explosives that were manufactured.
Can you tell me what year the TNT plants were built and why?
I don't know. I really don't know. It would have been probably the right at the beginning of World War II, I'm sure, but I don't know the exact dates.
Can you was it? I guess it was between 42 and 45. I think. Maybe.
Yeah, that is right. It was between 1942 and 45. I'm lousy with dates, by the way.
Yeah, me too. Was it the before they built it there? Was it the McClintock Wildlife Preserve, or was that after?
That was after.
Okay, so can you tell me about the history of it in terms of it going from what was it before the TNT plant, and then it became the TNT plant, and then what was it after? Like, can you just give me a history of that?
Yeah, it was basically a community, was there, and they took this, it was open fields, of course. It was nothing but woods at the time, and then they built this entire community up there. I mean, there's several thousand acres up there, and then when it's still owned by the federal government, they still use it for some different things, but what they did was they just let it go back wild again, and they tore down some of the structures that were there. Some of them the people didn't need to get into, but most of them are still there. In fact, they're just overgrown with ivy and trees, but they're there. The railroad tracks still run through it if you know where to look and find them. And the igloos, of course, are still there. Every one of the igloos are there. You can even go in some now, and a few of the buildings are there. But some of the buildings, particularly the North Power Plant, the one where most of the activity went on around that time, has been torn down. And it was torn down, number one, because a lot of the kids were going in it. It was a great place to play. And then number two, it was behind our stage at our fair, and there was some graffiti on it that wasn't very flattering when everybody got together to watch the county fair. So it came down, unfortunately, but everything else is just about still out there.
Can you tell me after the I guess, is this right? How it happened where the power plant shut down and then some property was seized for kind of like a wildlife sanctuary? Is that right? After the plant was shut down, then there was property designated for kind of like wildlife. Is that?
Well, the government still owned it. It didn't. I mean, the ownership of the property never changed hands. It started wild. They built this facility and let it go back wild. And that's what happens here, of course, if you don't maintain it, is you just let the trees grow and everything grow. And now it's a government facility where they have wildlife studies, and there's still government offices there with wildlife managers there, and it's still maintained by the federal government, and it's just what they call wildlife management area here in West Virginia, where you can hunt and fish. It's open to the public. I don't know that most people realize that all of the property where all this happened, anyone can go on anytime now. It's open to the public. I don't recommend coming during deer season, but I would come any other time. So,
can you just tell me again what the igloos specifically were used for? I know they were used for, like, during the TNT plant was they were used for storing like TNT, things related to the plant. I don't know if this is correct, and I heard like different things, but like after the plant shut down, I heard that some of those igloos were rented out to other companies to use and things like that. Do you know about that at all?
Yes, the igloos, they're still being used. Some construction companies have rented some of the igloos to store their explosives in. They're mostly igloos. Some of the igloos are on private property, and but there's several are still in use. And there was actually some explosives stolen out of the igloos. I think 2 years ago, the FBI was here to look into that, and they were never recovered that I know of.
Were there ever any,
Could you ask that gentleman to?
Can you, were there ever any chemical companies or any things like that were used? Were there ever any chemical companies that ever rented out the facilities to store like chemicals at all or anything like that? I heard different reports about.
Well, there was a chemical plant right across the street from the facility called Panasonic, and but of course there was a lot of chemicals used to manufacture the explosives, huge vats of acid and different things like that. In fact, a couple of the fellows that worked there said they don't know that with all the stuff they were breathing, that they would have survived much longer working in that atmosphere, which, like I said, it was only operational for probably about 3 or 4 years. But there was a tremendous amount of chemicals used out there for the manufacture of explosives.
Can you just tell me about the plant shutting down after the war? Why there's no need for them there was no need for the plant to be operational because the war had ended, so it had shut down, and was out of commission. Can you just tell me post-war what happened?
Yeah, I mean after the war they did close the facility, and I guess there wasn't any need. We were told they closed the facility. I'm sure that they don't make everything public what they do, particularly when they're using explosives and things like that. But it was never used. Now there was a furniture factory out there at one time, and there's been some other factories out there that have leased some property out there. But as far as the manufacture of the explosives, those facilities were never used again.
Can you tell me about some of
There's, you're not around a major city,
right
here, so it was a good place.
Right, a good location for what they needed it for. We're good, right? Okay, can you tell me? We were just talking about some of the other companies that either leased or purchased the igloos for storage. Can you tell me, besides the TNT plant, tell me about some of the other companies that had either leased or rented the igloos, and what were some of the things that were stored there as well?
Well, there were companies here that actually bought explosives and dismantled them and took the powder out. And you can still see, if you go out in the igloos today, there are metal canisters still in there where the powder, where they put the powder. Now the lids are gone because I understand the lids were copper and they took the copper, but the metal will stay that way forever, and they're still in some of the igloos. So everything, an igloo is a part of the explosives industry, and not everyone has several igloos like we do. So almost everything in use with these igloos has to do with explosives, and there's still people out there that are working now dismantling some explosives and storing stuff in there. But it's also excellent, like I said, for construction companies. Not everybody's allowed to handle explosives either, so it's difficult to find a place where you can store them.
Can you tell me a bit about out near the TNT plants in the wildlife preserve? I think in the 80s and early 90s, some environmental investigations revealed that there were some chemical spills and things like that. Can you tell me about that?
Well, it's part of the TNT was part of the Superfund cleanup that was popular, several years ago, and they're still out there cleaning it up. I mean, some of the stuff leaked. There were pipes running all through it, and that moved the chemicals, and even a lot of the liquid dynamite moved through pipelines underneath. And over the years, some of them ruptured, and I assume, or broke or whatever. But right now, the TNT area is covered with ponds, and it's really a wildlife management area, or a migratory bird area. And some of the ponds got contaminated. And of course, everybody here fished in the ponds and ate the fish for years and years and years. But now it's still being cleaned up out there right now. Still, the EPA is still working on that area.
Do you know what year it was discovered that there was a problem out there? Approximately, was it 80s, 90s?
Yeah, it was at least the 80s. It may have been the 70s, but I believe it was probably early 80s when they were talking about all these brownfield sites, these contaminated sites, and they had this massive cleanup of the sites, and we were deemed one of the toxic sites that needed to be cleaned up, and it's been going on now for 20 years, so a barrel didn't tip over, I'll tell you that.
Yeah. The plants, the TNT plant area has had kind of like a long history to it, and there's been some with the weird stuff with the Mothman that happened there. Today, like in present time, is the TNT plants still like creepy out there? Is there still like a weird energy out there? Do they still get creeped out today by it?
Well, I can't speak for the kids out there. I know that we went out there all the time, and even now, it's not somewhere that I would be comfortable walking around at night. It's a jungle. It's very easy to get lost out there. It's a lot of swamp. I wouldn't want to go spend the night out there if I didn't have to. And there's not a lot of activity out just running around unless it's people hunting out there at night. But they have guns, so I don't think they're too worried. So.
I want to talk just two quick questions about cornstalk. Can you just tell me a little bit about the legend of cornstalk and the curse? Can you tell me about, as if I've never heard it before, you're telling me for the first time?
Well, the story of cornstalk and the curse was that, of course, history, and it is history, that he did come here to warn the settlers that the Shawnee Indians were going to break the treaty and were going to fight a treaty that he had signed. And when he came here with his sons, some Indians who weren't affiliated with him, there were a lot of tribes in this area, killed somebody right across the river, and it upset the people here at Fort Randolph, and of course they had fought with him and his brothers many times before. Everybody knew everybody, so in retaliation they murdered him here and literally just shot him down without a chance. And there was a legend that he did put a curse on Point Pleasant, although there's no historical fact of that. And some people say it came from a play personally, it's kind of hard to put a curse on somebody when you have 8 bullets in you, which is what he got hit with immediately. But it is not, makes a nice story, but it's not a historical fact. But we've kind of lived up to it. Spent a couple hours out there, and if he didn't show, he didn't show. So. There's an entire generation of Mothman children here.
That's the real statement. Okay, ready? So I wanted to ask you, you brought up a good point about the TNT plant. Can you just tell me about, that you had grown up in this area and lived here your whole life, but you never even knew anyone that worked in the plant. So there was kind of there was some mysteriousness about it. It was kind of this weird place, like you said, its own little thing. Can you just tell me about that, growing up here and not knowing anybody?
Well, yeah, I mean, I've lived here for 40 years, and maybe it's just because I was young, but still there are people that age here, but I'd never really met anyone that worked there, never talked to anyone that worked there.
Can you hold on a second? Can we start again? When you say there, can you say the TNT plant just so people know later?
Yeah. Now, I've, in the 40 years that I've lived here, I've never really talked to anyone that's worked in the TNT plant. It wasn't until a few months ago that actually I really knew any of the details about it. I didn't know what the buildings were in the TNT plant, although I'd been out there many, many times, all from the time I was a child. I'd never had anyone explain to me what happened other than I knew the igloos for explosives, but it wasn't until the River Museum did an exhibit on the TNT area that really most of the local people actually found out what was going on in that area. So I don't know if that was a mystery, but it was just something that wasn't, I don't think, common knowledge, certainly not anybody my age.
And can you tell me, I guess, what do you think it's part because when the TNT plant was operational and running, and even when it was closed but still kind of there, the fact that, do you think it was just, was the things that went on there kind of like hush hush? Were they kind of was it kind of just, it wasn't really advertised what was there? Were they kind of, kept it quiet there, would you say? Or? Well,
back when the TNT plant was operating, it was, like I said, it was a huge facility. I mean, everybody knew about it. I'm sure here they had to. It was an entire community. They may have not known what was going on inside there, but they knew that these thousands of acres were being used, and of course people worked there. And I'm sure if I was the age of the men that worked at the TNT plant in the 40s, I would have known, but I wasn't born until 10 years after the facility closed, and then another 10 years later, it was a wildlife area that I hunted and fished in, and all I knew or cared about at that time, it was a great place to hunt deer and catch bass. So, and look for the Mothman. So that was, I really, and like I said, most people have no idea about that facility.
Would you say there's some controversy about the plant? Do some people question if, there were maybe some other things going on behind the scenes in that building?
I don't, I really haven't heard people say too much about it. Even with all of the things that went on in the 60s, people don't hear or kind of keep to themselves, don't really, look into things like that. Probably it's a good reason why they built it here, but just the types, of people here. I mean, they would show up, do their job, and go home, and probably much like the soldiers that never come home and tell you what happened in the battles they fought. So I was an older child. I was a man until I knew my father even fought in Korea, until he mentioned it about a movie we were watching, that he was there one day. And those type of people, they just don't talk about stuff like that. So there wasn't a whole lot of talk about it. He knew a lot about it.
Yeah.
He didn't have any problems talking off the camera. Right. So I don't know. Paul may know. I mean, he knows a great deal about it, but it just may be this guy. He wasn't one of the guys they were interviewing though for the piece. So, but he is military. I think so.
I'll ask you another question about cornstalk. Do a lot of townspeople believe in the cornstalk curse? Like what type of, can you tell me what type of things are blamed on the cornstalk curse here in town? There's been a lot of things blamed, from like fires to floods and disasters, tragedies. And then can you just tell me if a lot of people buy into it? Do people really believe in the curse?
Well, everyone here has heard about the cornstalk's curse. I mean, it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek thing. And really, I thought growing up here, I lived in just a quiet little town. But in talking to the tourists that come and rehashing the history, and we talk about bridges falling and floods and towns flooding and courthouses blowing up. And so I've heard all those things tongue-in-cheek blamed on cornstalk's curse. That's something everybody kind of laughs off disasters and says about it. But it was supposedly, even with the legend, it was supposedly only last 100 years. So it's over. So we're prospering now.
Okay, I'm going to ask you some Mothman stuff. No. Can you just, it doesn't have to be like a formal answer at all. Can you just list for me, for people that saw the Mothman, for what the Mothman is, can you list for me just the physical characteristics of it? People that saw it, according to the myth, the legend, what does it look like? Just tell me like a laundry list of the physical characteristics.
Well, from the people that I've talked to who saw this, and those have been people who saw it from when they were 8 years old to adults seeing it from airplanes to people seeing it out there riding motorcycles. Actually, there's the general description. They talk, of course, about the eyes first. I mean, everybody always says that there's two huge red eyes, and that's the first thing they talk about. And then the wings, the size of the wings. I mean, for a long time, locally, it was known as the Birdman. It didn't really become the Mothman until John Keel wrote his book. It was described as a huge bird. And although it was, it chased cars, and although it didn't hurt anybody, it sure scared the life out of several people. And basically, what happened was, we all heard there was a huge bird out in the TNT chasing cars. Well, heck, everybody went in the car and took off. They wanted to see this massive bird. They went looking for it, and the frightening thing was some people found it, and some of them had their kids in the car with them, and some guys went out to the North Power Plant on their motorcycles. It was a joke to look for the Mothman, and looked up in the top of the power plant and found it. So I think that's probably more scary than anything, is going out there as a joke and actually finding the joke looking in the window of your car. And that's a lot of these sightings were up close. These weren't flashes in a forest. These were look into the window of your windshield, or look up and it's on a catwalk above you, or a lot of kids talk about being out there at a fire at a party and it coming in, from the dark. So, but I've heard it anywhere from from the size of the statue we have here, and that's probably a close proximity of it. But from 6 to 7 feet to, one person told me it was small. Maybe like of a small child. So I don't know. There may have been more than one. Who knows? So I don't know. I haven't even read Keel's book. You know what I mean? Other than inserts, just different parts of it would be better, because it'd be great. I mean,
but it didn't do the real story.
No, of course, my kids. I've really not seen the movie from beginning to end either, but. My kids, they come back, they want to see the Mothman, they want to, no, it never hurt anybody. It's not, but no one got hurt in the Blair Witch either,
exactly.
And so.
So can you tell me about the Scarberry and the Mallets, that when they saw the Mothman, one scene that seems to be, when that happened, it seemed like most people believed them. Is that true, or is that not accurate? That most people believed what they said when they said the first big sighting of the Mothman. that, November
Well,
15th, 66.
Well, when they did see Roger Scarberry and Linda McDaniel and the Mallets, I mean, it made the front page of the newspapers because they came back and reported it to the police, and the police believed them. They were scared to death, and they were our neighbors. I believed them because they were scared to death. Roger Scarberry had a beautiful hot rod that would have, if he would have scratched his car, he would have killed you. So some of my friends reminded me later that he had some scratches on his car, and they believed him because they knew that if it had been just a local person, there would have been a death that night. So, but they lived, on my street, and they were frightened. I mean, they really were. And then it came out in the newspapers, and everybody believed enough to get in their cars and go up and look. I mean, they described it as a massive bird, it wasn't, of course, there wasn't the knowledge you have about now. Everyone just wanted to go see this big 6-foot bird that's chasing cars in the TNT area. So everyone went looking for it.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that? You have kind of a unique perspective. You were neighbors with them. Can you tell me about remembering when it happened and what was going on?
I was 10 years old. They were in high school.
Can you tell me, can you start again with, I was 10 years old when, and then when Scarberry's and Mallets first had their sighting?
Yeah. When Linda and Roger, which lived on my street, the Mallets didn't, but I knew them growing up. They were high school students, and I looked up to Roger because he had a nice car. And when they first saw it, what were you asking?
Just tell me if you can remember back then, being kind of in the area and kind of knowing them a bit. Just tell me about. Can you just remind? Tell me how that felt. Was it weird? Was it kind of?
Oh, okay, sure. Yeah,
tell me from your
that's
perspective.
right. Yeah. Well, anyway, when I was 10 years old, third grade, when all this happened, and Linda and Roger, we lived on the same street as me. Linda lived beside me. They were in high school, and we just, tell you the truth, I didn't think a whole lot about it. I remember all of it going on. I remember when John Keel came. I vaguely remember him because my mother told me to leave that hippie alone, and because I would follow him around the yard, and he knew my sisters. They were 13 and 15 years older than me, and he was their age, and they knew him. And I remember the government talking about the government cars and the men dressed in black suits coming to town, which no one wore suits in town here then anyway. But I remember hearing all about it, but I don't. When you're 10 years old, like I said, you think everyone has a monster. It's not that big a deal or a big bird. So it really, and Jeff Walmsley grew up 2 doors down from me, so we both had a front row seat to it. Although Jeff was quite a bit younger than me and doesn't even remember that much, I don't think. But
do we need to fix the? We were talking a bit about before about the Mothman, some of the characteristics. Can you just talk to me specifically about the eyes of the Mothman?
Well, the main thing that all the eyewitnesses talk about are the red eyes, huge red eyes, and kind of mesmerizing red eyes. It's a thing that I guess they probably have nightmares about the most. I know Linda does. Linda Scarberry always says she can't look out a window without being afraid in the dark with seeing those eyes again. So. That is the most distinguishing characteristic. I guess it was something you could see from a ways too. So that's the main thing.
Can you tell me in the area after the Mothman spotted up at the TNT plant? TNT plant has kind of a new vibe about it now. It used to be a place where people could go hunting and fishing. It was kind of like peaceful, and there wasn't really any negative thing about it, even though people went still after to see the Mothman. But there was kind of a new atmosphere up there. Hunters went there trying to shoot it, catch it, kill it. Everyone wanted to see it. Can you just tell me about what's life up at the TNT plant now after Mothman spotted?
Well, for years after they saw the Mothman, it was still just a hunting preserve or a wildlife management area for hunting and fishing, and basically that's where a whole generation of kids learn to hunt and fish, and but everyone, we kind of look at it in a different. It's kind of looked at in a different. It's become very popular for a different reason. People are coming for different reasons. Mostly people, of course, from out of our area and out of our state are coming to the TNT area to see where this Mothman movie, the background was at, because it's a public area. Anyone can come there. You can look around anytime, day or night. I mean, even at night, you're allowed in that area, because they do hunt at night out there for raccoons and things like that. But it's almost become it's become a tourist attraction now because of the Mothman.
And do you remember as a kid, in the months after the Mothman spotted, the kind of changeover in perspective of how people now looked at the TNT plant? Do you remember that at all? That were people starting to talk a little differently now about that area? Was it kind of
well, back then everyone went. Even before the Mothman, I was, as a child, was hunting and fishing out there, and the Mothman, after they saw it, it kind of changed the tone of the place. You kind of looked over your shoulder quite a bit, particularly if you're out there at night, and you definitely didn't want to break down and run out of gas out there at night and have to walk out of there or somebody pick you up, or you didn't want to have to wreck, because you always had that in the back of your mind. And even now, I don't know, I guess it's because of the time I grew up, but I still wouldn't want to take a walk out there after dark by myself for very, very long. So
can you tell me how, can you tell me how during kind of all the Mothman frenzy, people around town, it seemed to be kind of divided. They were questioning what it was. Some people thought it was a bird. Can you tell me about that? Did it separate the town at all? And what were people speculating that it was? I had heard that some people thought it was an angel. Some people thought it was a demon. Some people thought it was good. Some people thought it was bad. Can you run through those kind of opinions that spread around the community?
Well, yeah. At the time that all of this started, the newspaper reports were about it being a large bird. Even some people speculated that it was a sandhill crane, because at those times we didn't have the migratory birds that we do now. No one had really seen a sandhill crane. They showed us pictures, and they showed pictures of this large crane to the people that saw it and asked them if they'd seen it. But we have them around here now because birds are migrating again. But there's not the pesticides and everything that they were, but we didn't. It was a bird. I mean, that everything said the bird. For years, it was speculated that it was a large bird. Some, they hunted it. They tried to. In fact, in our river museum, they have a large barn owl that somebody shot that's stuffed there that has this huge 5-foot wingspan that they said, well, here's the Mothman. So, but it wasn't until after Keel's book came out, and then even then it wasn't until the movie that everyone saw that it became this demon. Now it scared the life out of the people that was out there, and we all knew what they told us about it, and their descriptions. The statue here is fairly accurate to their descriptions, but to the typical person and from the news stories, it was a large bird that was out there chasing people, which meant let's go shoot it. So I'll tell you, the real questions on everybody's mind here at the time was is it a bird? Are we allowed to shoot it? And if there's more than one, can we shoot two? So there wasn't a fear. Everyone wanted to mount this thing on their walls. So, and there's speculation that the Mothman is mounted on somebody's wall somewhere. So that's why it hasn't been seen. But we've heard reports, and we still get reports from all over the world of this thing being spotted. So we've become the Mothman World Center here, I guess, for his world headquarters.
This podcast is a companion piece to the original feature-length documentary film from 2011 of the same title. If you're enjoying this podcast, we encourage you to see the film that started it all by visiting www.eyesofthemothman.com.
A couple more questions about Mothman, then I want to get into the Silver Bridge. This kind of, the things that people were seeing were kind of unique because, like you touched on it before, can you expand on it? People that saw the Mothman, they didn't see like a flying bird 50 feet away and it would last a few seconds and they called it Mothman. The people that spotted this thing, there were long periods of time, sometimes 5-10 minutes seeing this thing. It was 10 feet away. Can you tell me about the uniqueness of the majority of the sightings of the Mothman? How they kind of broke the mold?
Well, that the real difference between the sightings of the Mothman and, let's say, the Loch Ness Monster or even Bigfoot, which we've become associated with, it wasn't glances in the woods or just a quick movement behind the building. Now, what in the hell can we have going on?
That's happened.
There was a bumper to bumper this morning, and I saw him just scattering cars roaring down through town with the sirens on. And so, what are we talking about? Remind me.
We were talking about the uniqueness of these sightings. It wasn't just, someone sees a light in the sky and so it's Mothman. People were seeing this thing extremely close, long periods of time, and there were multiple witnesses. And those kind of make this really unique.
Yeah. Well, we've sort of been grouped together with Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster. So I guess I kind of use those as an example. But a lot of those were glances, seeing a shape move through the water. Even with Bigfoot, a guy turning around and running from a distance. The Mothman, there's over 100 eyewitness sightings that have been documented from children who were with their parents to teenagers riding on motorcycles or out running around in their cars, to farmers all along the river, all different age groups that have seen this thing. And some of the sightings were looking in your window at a car window, and people were chased, although no one was hurt, but people were fleeing from this thing. It wasn't like they were trying to go out, and no one was there with a camera trying to get a picture of Bigfoot. They went out with the family to see this large bird that was harassing people. And some of them found the large bird that was harassing people and got harassed too. So, it's, and the people are still alive. They're still here. They're still scared. And you can come here and talk to them, and you can't do that everywhere else. And there's, like I said, there's more than one. And some of the people you talk to would tell you I was 10 years old in the back of my mom's car. And so you'll get all different stories, all different age groups, and yeah.
Can you just tell me a little bit about growing up in West Virginia, for people that have never been to West Virginia, people that don't know it? Can you talk to me a little bit, just in general, about the terrain of West Virginia? There's a lot of mountains, there's a lot of forest, woods, things like that. There's a lot of places for things, for things to kind of like something. If you wanted to disappear, you can. So can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Yeah. Well, here in West Virginia, we're in the High River Valley. This is probably the flattest part of West Virginia, but the hills start, about just right up from the river. So there is a lot of deep hollows and hills, and it's predominantly forest. If you fly over this area, it's going to be black. I mean, from the air, I've flown over it many, many times, and it's predominantly forest here. And so something could hide. They do. I mean, we have bears and different things like that here that are not seen every day. So,
In regards to, there was the kind of the Mothman incidents, there were UFOs, there were kind of these government people walking around. There's all these kind of stories and events that have come out of here, things like with the Silver Bridge. When looking at all these things together, do a lot of townspeople kind of acquaint them all together? Do a lot of people kind of lump all this stuff together, like the curse of Cornstalk, the bridge falling, the Mothman, the UFOs, the Men in Black too? Like, a lot of people look at these as kind of all little pieces of the same kind of unknown puzzle. Is that kind of the typical perspective, I guess, by people that are knowledgeable on these things? They kind of all think they're related to one another.
Well, a lot of the people in town, probably think more about, because of the attention we've gotten, the Mothman and the Men in Black and the bridge falling and all that. But quite frankly, I mean, the main thing people think about here is the tragedy with the bridge, because that touched everybody. That was real. We knew it was real. We all had friends on that bridge. And any talk, any speculation, any buzz about the Mothman ended on the day that bridge fell, because it touched everybody. And really, even now, a lot, is it kind of the times that happened together. People don't, they don't say much about the Mothman because it happened right at the bridge, not because the Mothman had anything to do with the bridge, but just imagine if we're talking about the Mothman was sighted over the World Trade Centers after they were blown. You want to hear about that. There's a tragedy that happened and people lost their lives. So the bridge overshadows everything that happened back then.
Okay, good. So I want to get into talking about the bridge and what happened now. Okay.
Okay.
Cover that stuff. Can you tell me when the Silver Bridge was first constructed, what made it unique at the time? If some of the things that I've read were that it had suspension rocker towers and eye bars and heat treated carbon steel, things like that. Can you tell me when the bridge is first made? Tell me about some of those things that made it unique.
Well, the Silver Bridge, of course, is it came from the color of the bridge. It was painted silver. It was, at the time they built it, was, I guess, a high-tech bridge, a suspension bridge. It was sort of new technology at the time they built it. It was really a sight, of course, and it was, but it had fallen into disrepair, and it was not in good shape when it did fall. But it was the main link for the people of Point Pleasant to a grocery store right across the river. So it was packed. It was full all the time. And I've walked across it many times as a child. People even walked across the river to shop at this grocery store on the end. But I don't know that people knew anything about. It was just a bridge. We crossed it. It wasn't like, here's this wonderful. It wasn't like the bridges in New York. It was just, when you live here in Point Pleasant, you have to cross a bridge every day. We live with bridges. There's 2 rivers to cross, and bridges are bridges, and you just want to cross them. It wasn't until after it fell that we even questioned what kind of a bridge it was, or anybody even knew anything about it. But it was not in good shape when it fell. I know that. I've walked across it many times.
Do you know, talking about the maintenance of the bridge throughout the years, the upkeep of it, can you tell me a little bit about that? I'd read that there was some repair work done in 1951, and that there were some annual inspections. Can you just tell me, from the best of your knowledge, of what you know about the upkeep and stuff of the bridge?
Well, I crossed the bridge a lot. My sister lived in an apartment right at the foot of the bridge where the Iron Gate restaurant is now. And the grocery store that everybody shopped at was at the foot of the bridge. Everyone in West Virginia shops for groceries in Ohio because they don't have a tax on their food. So everyone crosses the bridges just like you go into another neighborhood and buys their groceries. So we used to walk across the bridge all the time, and the bridge would sway. I guess because it was a suspension bridge, but I remember as a little kid a lot of times grabbing on because the bridge would move. And my most vivid memory of the bridge was we got on top of the bridge and had a big hole in the sidewalk, and my sister happened to swing me over the hole. So it when I said it was in disrepair, I mean, even from a perspective of the little kid, it was not in good shape. When your sister has to swing you over a hole on the sidewalk, you could look right down to the river. But it was used so much, and when you cross bridges every day in your life, we don't think anything up until that point about crossing bridges. Now, people from Point Pleasant have a completely different attitude about crossing bridges and sitting on bridges. We don't sit on bridges at all. So I told you about that cab driver in New York when I got off the Brooklyn Bridge and walked off.
Yeah, the bridge and rush hour, you sit on the bridge for.
Not me, I walked. If I was going down on the Brooklyn, it was going to be on the run.
So December 15th in 1967, it's almost a year. I think it's 13 months after the first big sighting of the Mothman. It's the bridge's 39th year in existence. Before jumping into the fall of it, can you just tell me, if you can even remember from just being here, like what type of night it was for people that don't know, if you can kind of paint a picture for me of up before the collapse without going into it. You know, what kind of night was it? Was it just another day in Point Pleasant? Tell me about that.
Well, at the time the Silver Bridge did collapse, it was December. It was Christmas time, and there was a stoplight that right in town that controlled the traffic crossing the bridge, and actually the light had gone out from what I'm told, and so the traffic piled up on the bridge, and there was a lot of traffic because people were shopping, going Christmas shopping, buying food, had a lot of relatives coming in. There were a lot of people traveling at that time. There were several people that went down on the bridge that weren't from here that were traveling to visit families. So the bridge was abnormally packed. It was bumper to bumper, both lanes, which normally that light controlled that situation, so you didn't have that. So it was kind of an unusual circumstance, but I'm sure the bridge had been packed before, and I know absolutely no one had even given it a thought that bridge would go down. I mean, it was just such a shock. It was just, I guess, like when an earthquake hits your town, you never think it's going to happen. So,
can you tell me, the Silver Bridge collapse, it was a major disaster, and it was even, I think, magnified more so because it happened in a town that's fairly small. Well, you were touched on it before that, for outsiders looking in, can you just put it in perspective of how traumatic it was? Because it's kind of like in a small town, they were, like you said, everyone knew someone affiliated with it. So can you tell me about that?
Yeah. The one thing about the Silver Bridge, I think, that makes it different than even some of the tragedies we've had today, and maybe not so different, but this is a town of 5,000 people. We know everybody. I mean, we know who belongs here and who doesn't, and we know all of our neighbors, and usually all of our neighbors' children and all of our neighbors' grandchildren. And when that many people are killed at once, in this community, it would be like a mine cave-in disaster, the same thing that would happen in other West Virginia communities. But, the gentleman that was mayor, his parents went down on it, and everyone had a friend or knew somebody that went on it. Some people knew more than one. I was in the third grade. The girl that sat in front of me, that desk was empty for the rest of the year. And I would say I knew that little girl well, but, there was an empty desk all year in our class to remind us, that it went down. So, but my family knew several people, and it was right before Christmas. That wasn't a good Christmas that year, I'm sure. And it kind of, that's something we think about every year in December. So, but it was horrible. My mother was downtown at the time and told me she ran out to the river and people were screaming and Christmas presents were floating in the river and cars were, going under, and she just turned around and walked away. She, you couldn't do anything for anybody. it was freezing, and the bridge didn't kill, the water did, and only one gentleman managed to survive the fall. It killed everybody, so it was couldn't believe it. I remember them saying the bridge fell. I'm like, what bridge? I just couldn't. Like I said, till I came down here and saw that it wasn't here anymore, we couldn't believe it happened.
How is the lighting and everything?
It's changing dramatically.
Did we get that last part? That whole, because that was really important.
Yeah.
If we can keep going too, was audio going to be killed by this? All right.
Can you just look up at the tray?
Do I?
We're gonna, because we can't record you talking to me, we're gonna get another shot of something. So yeah.
Wait, you're back to back. I'll look at the tray again.
Okay, me. Okay, so that's good. So might as well. We got some extra stuff that we can use in there.
That's good, since I'm the first one in 3 generations not to work for the railroad in my family.
Really?
Well, at least I'll get some railroad part out of that.
If you didn't choose this, I would have been filming somebody else, and you would have been going.
I would have been on that train, yeah.
So, we're doing well. I only a few more questions.
I was sitting in a tree when I found out the bridge fell.
Really? All right, I'm going to ask you about that.
Let's try to burn this off.
So tell me about that. Where were you when the bridge fell?
Well, when the bridge fell, like I said, I was in the 3rd grade. I was probably 10 years old. I was sitting in the top of a tree when I found out that the bridge fell. I was supposed to go with my dad to the grocery store, and I refused. I was playing. And when I didn't want to go somewhere, I climbed in the top of a tree so that nobody could come and get me. And I remember seeing my mother come down the road. I could see her from the top of the tree. I could see her coming, and she was moving good. And I remember seeing her, and she was upset, and she was crying, and I was thinking, no, I'm really going to get it this time, And I remember watching her come, down that road and thinking, oh my, she's mad. And she told me to get out of the tree. And when I got down, she hugged and kissed me, which was not what I was expecting. I was expecting to get thrashed, which I normally would have. And she told me the bridge had fallen. And she thought my father and I were on that bridge when she saw the cars in the water and all that. And the one time that I did disobey, probably the only time I ever didn't get in trouble for disobeying was the one time I avoided that bridge. So that's my memory of the Silver Bridge, is sitting in the top of that tree. So,
I mean, you were supposed to be going over the bridge to the grocery store?
Yes. In fact, when my mother saw the cars and the presents and the people, she thought we were on it, or we should be on it or close to it. And we probably should have been, but I was sitting in my tree.
From I know you weren't there, but from what's been reported, like if someone were to have witnessed the bridge fall, can you just tell me what it would look like in terms of like, did this happen immediately? Did it take 10 minutes, 5 minutes? What happened when the bridge fell?
One of the things that people really don't understand is how quickly this bridge went down. And because it was a suspension bridge, and even, of course, in the movie, the popular movie, it takes about 20 minutes for it to go down, and people have time to open their cars and run out, and, people are getting saved. It didn't happen that way at all. In fact, you didn't even have time to open your car door. What happened is the eye bolt broke. And when it broke, the bridge swung. And when it swung, the cars dropped off. And then when it swung back, the others dropped off. I mean, I'm sure most people never even knew what happened. One minute they were having a conversation about what they're going to have for dinner that night or what they're going to buy their son for Christmas. And it's over, because even when the cars hit the water, the bridge collapsed on top of the cars. So, one minute you're talking about Christmas, the next minute you're on the bottom of the river. And so it happened in minutes. And in fact, people thought there was an explosion. The people in town heard the popping and heard the boom of the bridge collapsing and came here and it was gone. It wasn't like they watched it collapse. It was gone and things were floating way down the river. So unless you were standing right there, the only people that really saw it collapse were the people that were in line who just were lucky that day that they were last in line to get on that bridge. But they're the only ones that really saw it fall. Because quite frankly, it was December. We're all not out here playing on the river. Now, if it had collapsed in June, July, or August, it would have had an audience of people skiing and doing everything else. But it just so happens in December, no one's out here. It was cold.
All right, thanks.
I'd have probably fallen on a bunch of skiers if it was.
Yeah. Sure. We're
We'll have to promise to put him in a safe house or something when this comes out or whatever.
It can be arranged. We'll put him in a bunker. We'll put him in an igloo.
Paul's probably signed some papers that said he can be shot for divulging what happened out there. So,
all right. Can you tell me after the bridge fell? Can you tell me go over the damages with me? Can you tell me how many people lost their life? And what was the reaction of the citizens in the community? Just so people know who've never heard the story. How many people was it?
46. 46. Yeah. Yes. When the bridge fell, of course, 46 people lost their lives, and everyone, like I said, was in shock because they knew most of the people, probably at least 30 of them or more were from here in this area, or from Gallipolis. A lot of them were prominent people, and it was a stunt. It was lost. A lot of them were lost to the community. People that had prominent roles here. So it was, of course, the people that were adults at that time. I'm sure it was devastating. As a little kid, as a 10-year-old, my perspective back then was I basically had to ride a ferry to get to my little league baseball games that were going on across the river. That was my big perspective of it back then. But you're talking about a 10-year-old. Life goes on for children, but the people who are adults, and to my parents and the people that age, they still vividly remember it. And it's something when you travel that you're recognized for. People recognize the name. And you usually have to tell somebody about it when you see them. They always ask about it. So, but like I said, as a 10-year-old, my memories of it are ferry rides. So,
can you tell me, after the investigation of the Silver Bridge was conducted by the inspectors to see what had caused it, can you tell me what was found?
Well, they did do an investigation, of course, a thorough investigation on what caused the bridge to collapse. And of course, it was written about in our local newspapers, and everybody followed it. And it was determined that an eye bolt, one of the main structures, had collapsed or broke. And you can come here now and go to our river museum and see that, the piece, an actual eye bolt, not the eye bolt that, of course, broke, but they can show you what an eye bolt is, show you where it's at on the bridge and how it collapsed. And so there's been, been a lot of study on it.
And prior to the bridge falling, there was a lot of weird stuff going on in town. You talked about it a little bit before. Was the bridge kind of like the cap on all of this weird stuff? Was it kind of just like, one thing was out doing the next? There was kind of like weird lights were seen in the sky, then Mothman is spotted, then weird people, and then all of a sudden there's this major tragedy. Was that kind of like the cap for all of this stuff? And then can you tell me, after it had fallen, that stuff seemed to taper off in sighting and in talk about it?
Well, the newspapers right up until the time the bridge fell for several months had been full of UFO sightings and Mothman sightings and people coming in to check it out and different things like that. And it was, I'm sure that it was a talk, because it was going on in the newspaper. They were writing about it quite a bit. But when the when the bridge fell, of course, it was the major story, and it was something that was written about, and it was a major cover. News from all over came here to cover the bridge falling. There wasn't anybody covering the Mothman but local news. It was just more of a local myth. But the bridge falling was an international story. People came from all over to film in, and like I said, people that had just been kind of following the sightings and the Mothman in the newspaper, just out of special interest. Of course, the bridge was a tragedy and a definite lost community. So it ended. The sightings ended, and I guess I'm sure people quit looking, and I think people would have gotten upset if they would have continued to write about it in the newspaper with the mood in the town, because there was a black mood over our town for quite a while, and it did kind of, it was kind of the culmination of all this crazy stuff going on, and then after the bridge fell, no one wanted to hear about this other, that silly stuff is what they said. We don't care about that, we're burying friends now. So it was like an airplane going down or something like that. So.
And you had talked about the noise of the bridge when it fell. I heard there were rumors that some people actually heard a noise like an explosion or a boom before the bridge going down. Yeah. Have you ever heard of that?
I've heard people talk about that we're on Main Street, that when the bridge fell, hearing a huge boom. And I think it's generally, accepted that the boom was the eyeball giving way, or else just the bridge dropping. Of course, when this suspension bridge, when half of it drops and bridges start collapsing, it's like blowing up buildings in cities. The thing collapses and there's noise, and so but most of the people in town heard the boom. They just couldn't figure out. They didn't know where it was coming from. I mean, there were several places booms could come from around here, including the TNT area. So, and the chemical plants, and it was a shock when it was the bridge, because it could have been anything. So, yeah.
Before I forget, can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
There's two people who were never found. One was an adult man, and one was
the girl that sat in front of me.
Was that the girl that sat in front of me?
Bias.
What was her name?
I think her name was Kathy Bias. I know her last name was Bias. I'm pretty sure it was Kathy. I didn't know her well, even though our classrooms were only maybe about 30 kids. But her body was never recovered. And I think whoever she was in the car with, I don't think was ever recovered either. But she was one of the ones, and that's what kind of made it real, even though, like I said, you're a little kid, you're going on. I mean, recess is still recess the next day, and homework still has to be done, and there's ball games to play, and like I said, as a kid, my memories of the bridge falling was the inconvenience of riding that ferry to go play baseball games. So, and watching them build the new bridge, because they built this new bridge in record time. I mean, it went up immediately. And but it was kind of cool riding a ferry, but gosh, after about the first 6 times, it's like, oh God, we got to wait on this ferry again, and it's taking forever, so, but that was it.
Did people buy the story of the faulty eye bar that went down, or was there some question just because of the weird stuff going on in town before it? Did some people still question if there was anything related to that, or did people pretty much accept the...
Well, the investigation about the falling of the bridge went on for quite a while. I mean, first of all, it took them a long time to recover all the metal. And they took it and they put it right down here on the river and in a big field, all the metal, which was kind of a curiosity for everybody. But it was quite a long time that I recall before we actually even heard about the reason for the bridge falling. But as far as, any people talking about the Mothman and associating with the bridge, or the Birdman at that time, it wasn't something you wanted to do. In fact, you didn't you didn't want to, it would have been considered in very poor taste at that time to say that this thing going on in TNT had anything to do with it, or that a UFO had anything to do with it. I mean, there was always there was speculation, but at the time, and for several years after that, you and I don't know anybody that really believes that. I not really, and that's something that we just we don't talk about that much.
Good. And they interviewed you somewhere over here, and I was like, God damn it, that's where I was going to interview him.
Oh yeah, right down here. Yeah, but it was in August, and man, the sweat was pouring off of me and all that.
You can't do it in August, but you didn't like that.
Good, because I was
somewhere similar, because I had come here and I said, well, this is where I want to interview Denny, and then I saw him on another one, and right when I got back after meeting him, and then I saw him in a similar spot, and I'm like, damn it, took my location.
Where was it? We should have about another down there somewhere. Minutes left.
All right, good. That should be that's perfect. So, can you tell me? Do you think, like in regards to all these kind of strange things, do you think that the mystery of the Mothman, the UFOs, all this stuff, do you think that it will ever be explained, that it'll ever be solved, or is this just something it's too bizarre that it'll ever come to conclusion?
Well, I mean, as far as all of the mystery and all of that, of course. I don't know if it'll ever be explained. I know that it would sure help tourism if he'd come back. I don't know how long he'd last, but because we keep running off people in the TNT with shotguns who say they're hunting for the Mothman, but I don't know. We've kind of become infamous for it, and we every year it seems to get bigger and more people get interested in it, but we still have, of course, we had a rich history here way before the Mothman came, and we'll always have that. So, and unfortunately, we'll always have the bridge, the disaster with the bridge. So, but the Mothman is just part of the mystery of the area, and it's unusual. So, yeah, I mean, it'll always be a part of Point Pleasant.
One thing I've noticed about the people here is that they're very, kind of, I guess, strong-willed is a good way to describe them. I mean, they've endured a lot of things, a lot of, from tragedies to just unfortunate setbacks to things like that, but they seem to be people that keep kind of like rolling with the punches. Can you talk to me a little bit about the people of Point Pleasant, how they are as just a class of people, and then also, one thing that I noticed is just even like the Mothman Festival. It's like, now it's been years since this thing happened, but when it did happen, it wasn't really the most embraced thing. It was something that was kind of creepy, something scary. But now it's kind of an example of the way people of Point Pleasant they can turn something unfortunate and bad into something kind of like to celebrate and to use to get together and have a good time. Can you tell me about that?
Well, Point Pleasant is an old community. I mean, it's pre-Revolutionary War. There's been a lot of people who live here as families go back to before the American Revolution. So they've been here for a long time. And when you live in an area for several generations and you're not transient and moving to cities and things, you kind of get enriched in the history. And yeah, there's events, different things that happen here that you can say that, everybody knows about, but it's only because their families have lived here for all through all these things, and the oral history of it has, been passed down. I mean, the kids that are in high school now, it's been years and years ago that any of this happened, but they know about it because their parents lived through it or their grandparents lived through it. So most of the people here have been here for a long time, so they know the history and they don't think anything about it. It doesn't, you know what I mean? I'd never even stopped to consider all the things that happened until I was given a tour one day and realized that it wasn't exactly an uneventful little boring town that I thought I grew up in, because every teenager here will tell you nothing happens here. There's nothing to do or whatever until I guess you start talking about monsters and bridges collapsing and things blowing up and secret government facilities, and it's a normal day here. So we don't even think about it.
That's great.
That's a great line.
That was awesome. Just because I'm done with my questions, but we have a couple of minutes before the sun goes away, so I'll just make use of it. Do you remember as a kid? There was also, aside from Mothman, there was also a lot of kind of people were seeing strange things in the sky that weren't Mothman, like lights and things that people were calling unidentified flying objects. But do you remember that at all? Do you remember that kind of buzz going around the community?
I do. Even before the Mothman, people were talking about things flying saucers, UFOs, whatever. And probably the best thing I can equate with that was my own experience, because everybody wanted to see a UFO. I mean, we looked for them, but I remember before the first Gulf War, which would kind of give you, maybe explain to you why we see UFOs here. But before the first Gulf War, as I was traveling down Route 2, I saw this saucer-shaped object going down the river, and cars were pulled over, pointing and looking at it, and I pulled over because, heck, I wanted to see a UFO. Everybody else had, And I watched this silent thing moving up and down the river, and it was pitch black, and it wasn't like anything I'd ever seen before. And I remember telling my wife when I got home, I finally got to see a UFO with a lot of other people. We were all watching it maneuver up and down the river. Well, I remember watching CNN when we bombed Baghdad, and my UFO was bombing Baghdad. What I was watching was a stealth bomber that no one had ever seen before, but from what we understand, they use this area a lot to test things because they use the river to navigate by, and quite frankly, when you're flying a stealth, we're not but about 20 or 30 minutes from the Air Force Base in Ohio, where all they're based from. Plus, you can fly over West Virginia. There's no major cities. There's nobody that's going to report. Think of how many times they've flown a stealth bomber over our area, and it was never reported. And I would have always thought I saw a UFO until in the newspapers they had all of the drawings of the stealth bomber and everything was about it, and I realized my UFO was us. So I don't know that what people were seeing back then, but I know they use this area to test things like that from my own experience.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that? That you've heard or that the military has actually used this area to test things, and especially using the river, because the river has had a lot of sightings. Be acquainted with it. Can you tell me just about the military history there with that? That it's believed that the military actually uses this area to test new flights and things like that, and that even the river for a juxtaposition to where they are.
Well, it makes sense. Of course, the Air Force Base is in Ohio. It's not far from here. You're not going to test a stealth bomber that you don't want anybody to see over Columbus or Cincinnati or Cleveland. You're going to have to take it somewhere where it's not going to be seen. And like you fly over West Virginia from the air, unless you're over Huntington or Charleston, it's black, but you can see the rivers, and the rivers stand out just like silver running through there. So you can navigate with the rivers, even though they probably don't need it, but you can fly over the rivers, and there's not a lot of people, watch. I'm sure guys on the riverboats have seen all kinds of things. Those are probably the people who've seen more UFOs than any one of the guys that works on the riverboats. But it just makes sense that they would come here and test their things here, and because no one would even say anything about it if they saw it. Like I said, I didn't call a newspaper. I called my wife. I didn't, when I thought I saw a UFO, I didn't call up a news station and say, saw a UFO. I was just excited that I got to. I was really disappointed when I found out it was a bomber. I was bummed out. I mean, my UFO was bombing Baghdad, and I, there went my claim to fame right there. So, I'm sure Saddam Hussein was seeing UFOs that night too. So,
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Eyes of the Mothman, the podcast. For more information about our program, or to find out where you can watch the original documentary film or purchase a limited edition signed DVD copy, please visit www.eyesofthemothman.com.